Picture of a sturgeon.
Picture of a sturgeon.
Discuss.
Yes. Aren't they impressive? We watched a man pet one.
A very drunk man.
Oh, yeah. This fish is a beautiful fish. Release it. Just roll it over. It's clearly traumatized.
His fetish was born that day.
God. Hello, everyone. Welcome to It Began in the Basement. I'm Megan.
I'm Laura.
And today we're going to talk to you about cryptids. And so I have a little list for us. And the first question is, what is? So, Laura, what is?
What does the cryptid is?
Yes.
I would basically define cryptids as those animals that you might see a flash of in the middle of the night, saying you're driving along a dark, lonely stretch of road and you see what you think is a bipedal dog man and you're not sure entirely what you saw.
Now, how long were you drinking before you saw the bipedal dog man?
That is a very important question to ask when dealing with cryptozoology at all ever. According to our mighty Lord and Savior, Wikipedia, and it's summarized best here, I think, is cryptozoology is a pseudoscience with the goal of identifying and describing beings from the folklore and the fossil record, which I think is a great way of putting it, rather than that thing that you saw wandering down.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that make claims. Usually that thing I saw, and then it's trying to narrow it down. Like you've got the chupacabra, you've got the jackalope, you've got the Fiji mermaid, you have sea monsters. Everybody has heard of Nessie, for example. Everyone knows what a sea monster is. And there are plenty of creatures that technically qualify as sea monsters, but they are real. That's the difference. And so it's sometimes a bit of a shame that people want to kind of neglect the creatures we already have that are quite fascinating in pursuit of ones that may or may not exist.
I think it's also really interesting because, as we were discussing earlier, you know, these giant fish like the sturgeons we were watching the videos of earlier, the ancients may not have realized what they were looking at, and especially if it's so long you can't see the entire length of it, you might start to attribute, it might be the spirit of that lake, supernatural qualities to that thing. But over time, I think a part of it is people from even 400, 500 years ago, as I said earlier, they have a different vocabulary for how they describe things, and their understanding of these things may not be certainly wasn't what it is for us now. So over time, I think stories change as they're told, and things come, certain qualities come, certain qualities go, and I think what you wind up with is you get cryptids, at least in part.
Well, you also have the phenomenon of, the fish I caught was this big as you move your hands increasingly further apart. And that's a lot of how I hear people talk about bears out by my cabin, is at first the bear's eyes were like a hand span apart. By the time they're done talking, they were headlights in the night, and that's how big the bear was.
Yeah, it's always funny how that works, and also witness testimony in and of itself. Even just at a standard crime scene, like 5 different people may
witness testimony is pretty much the worst thing you can
do.
have.
5 different perpetrators running away from the scene of the crime. One guy may say he has red hair, one guy may say he has black hair. So try to apply that to, anything to do with that. That is witnessing a scene in progress, whereas if it's a flash of a creature in the middle of the night, no way.
And you also continue to run that over in your head over and over again. And as you tell the story, it probably changes, even if you're talking amongst yourself in cars. Like, let's say you did blow by something, you're like, what was that? And then, of course, your story evolves as you find the common denominators amongst the group, but then the things that are the left out details, it's very easy to be suggestible.
Yes, absolutely. And I think also when somebody is responding to that, maybe they would get really into the story and say, how did you make it away alive? And then you would naturally embellish to, make yourself sound more impressive or something like that. And maybe that embellishment sticks from then on out. As you said, like the story does evolve. Do you have any particular cryptids that you find most interesting that...
Oh, I was thinking we could talk about some of the ones that are within driving distance today. So there's a couple that are nearby. I know you've got one since you used to live closer to New Jersey. But the one that I was researching, since I grew up in Erie, and the lake's a pretty big part of that, is instead of a Nessie, we have a Bessie. So I've got a little bit of a description of Bessie here. The first sighting was in 1793. It's been described as anywhere from 30 to 50 feet long, from a foot in circumference to 4 feet in circumference, which is a very big difference in an animal that's like the size of a barrel or something that's about the size of an eel. The last sighting that I could find was in 1993. I think there's a couple of reasons for that, and I think the main one is our cameras have gotten a lot better. Because I was trying to find Bessie footage on YouTube, as you do, and people had the shittiest cameras known to man on the worst settings possible. Like, I couldn't tell if it was waves or logs or what. Bessie is said to have sort of a dog-like head and to have little feeties or arms, something that kind of sets it apart from having fins. But again, a lot of the people who were reporting this were probably varying shades of tired, drunk, or any other number of factors. So, of course, we have the exaggeration factor as well. So for the 1793 case, the captain of the sloop Felicity claimed that he startled a large creature that was, quote, more than a rod, which would be 16.5 feet in length. So that's pretty decently sized, but when you think about the creatures that can live in bodies of water, you have the oarfish, which already looks like a sea monster, and then
absolutely.
You have the sturgeon. And both of these creatures are very fascinating, very monstrous looking. Any of them, if they were drawn in a style that would look like block print, would be something that you could peel off of an old pirate map and be like, there are monsters here.
Yeah.
And sturgeon seem to be the best candidate for what Bessie actually is. They can live over 150 years, but that's as far as we know. We don't live 150 years. They can apparently get up to about 7 feet and 240 pounds, but again, if they are continuing to grow past our own lifespans, they could get even bigger. And when you see their face, they are a typical sea monster. They are a frightening creature, especially if you're next to it in a boat. It would be very easy to exaggerate the size of something like that. And if you would see it cresting above the water with its many fins, it would be easy to see it as something that was much longer than it actually is. Make it look like it has more of a serpentine body than it's kind of like a stubby, scaly body that it sort of has. But they're just so huge that even seeing it normally is terrifying.
For some reason, that just made me think of cryptozoology. I don't know what I saw.
It's just a shrug. Just a man shrugging.
I'm sure you'll see this also in the Bessie log of encounters, that there are probably people that saw something out in that water, but they don't want their family and neighbors and friends to think they're insane, so they don't say anything for 20, 30, 40 years. And then when they think they're on their deathbed, they say something to little Johnny, who is now 55. How did you originally learn about Bessie?
I knew about Champ, which is the Lake Champlain monster. I was just curious, and it seems like pretty much every body of water has a sea monster attributed to it. So you just have to type in body of water, sea monster, you will get something. And they often have cute little names. I did see, there was an account that I read on a cryptozoological page that was a man's description of the thing he saw, and it started off with there were beer cans rolling around on my boat.
At least she was honest, being forthright about it.
Yeah.
Because I think with anecdotal evidence, if you can even apply that word here, that is the best you can ask for.
But that also gets back to what is your measure of proof?
Yep.
Because if a witness who is desperately trying to describe something in a criminal case can do so poorly, someone who is panicked or otherwise out of their normal mind cannot be expected to do so, especially if they are trying to save face in front of friends and neighbors.
Yep.
If you saw something innocuous and weird and you were freaked out at it, I think you would be afraid people might think less of you if you were afraid of this harmless little thing. So of course you have to make it big and scary. Granted,
that's also
things
true.
in the water are frightening enough. They are all icebergs. You see the top of them, you don't know what's under the water.
That's very true.
There are many terrifying creatures that are in the water. And so I think the main thing with sea monsters is I think we want to discover something new, and we often do. There's a lot of creatures that we have probably not even touched in the ocean. Definitely many in rainforests that we haven't discovered. So cryptid, in some ways, is a creature yet to be discovered. And the thing I like about people's enthusiasms for cryptids is that I feel like it's that exploration drive that people still have. People still want to discover something in a world that's been largely mapped.
Right, absolutely. And I think if you have the right attitude towards it, you can uncover really awesome, cool things that actually exist along the road.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's rather unfortunate that there is a lot of superstition attached to cryptozoology. Like, I know what I saw, it was the Bigfoot. It's, no, you may have seen, as you mentioned earlier, some piece of shit had a chimpanzee and just let him loose, and he's just been wandering the woods.
Oh yeah, we were
Maine.
talking about this for a little while earlier,
Yeah.
that what I have learned from a lot of news is people have exotic pets. They are cute when they are little. They're not so cute when they're a chimpanzee who demonstrates dominance by biting off fingers. So there is a problem where people who have had exotic pets will release them, and if you're not expecting to see a bear or a chimpanzee in your neck of the woods, there's a good chance you might be like, holy shit, that was a Sasquatch.
With urban sprawl and wilderness constantly conflicting, with the family with the 2.5 kids and the white picket fence and everything, people, when they see something that's that far out of their normal everyday existence, they might be doubly unsure of what they saw. I know for me, and I talk about this a lot, but going out west, seeing bears in person, it almost feels like something that big shouldn't exist, because they're huge. So I think seeing something, again, out of the ordinary, and rather suddenly too, a consistent thing I see in cryptozoology in general is bipedal creatures, at least. The person that sees that, they get this overwhelming sense of, I need to not be here, I need to get away. I can't help but wonder how much of that is them being afraid of an unknown thing, which is completely rational, completely fine, or that creature projecting, you need to not be here. But that's up for debate, really.
So speaking of things that kind of have more of that folklore backing to them, you have a critter that you kind of wanted to talk about a little bit.
Yeah, I grew up with the Jersey Devil because the county I'm from literally rubs shoulders with New Jersey. So from what I remember of the origin story, such as it is, for the Jersey Devil, it almost sounds like the Witch movie, kind of, in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. The movie The Witch that came out, last year?
Yes. Kind of, I don't know, for some reason there seems to be some overlap. Anyway, basically, mother leads, has 12 kids. Good God, ouch, is all I can think of. By the 13th kid, she curses him, and it is rumored that his father is in fact the devil. So she curses him, and there is some follow-up accusing Mother Leeds herself of being a witch or having some pact with the devil. And her son flies out of the chimney, and subsequent encounters with the Jersey Devil have described him as this weird horse winged goat thing. And I'm like, guys, this is gonna sound awful, and I now sound like I have some weird vendetta against New Jersey, but out of all the things you could slap on a cryptid, you gotta go with, the half-horse that it can't even be a Pegasus. It has to be the half-horse with demon wings. I'm like, this sounds like a 14-year-old trying to really be edgy on DeviantArt.
But when you see the drawings of it, it looks like something that a 4-year-old did a doodle of.
Yeah.
And then, an adult rendered beautifully.
Yep.
Because it's just so misproportioned. The main picture that you often see for the Jersey Devil is this old print, and much of it is designed after a horse, but it's just the proportions are really messed with. It just has wings slapped on it more than anything else. But it has traits when people talk about it. It has wings, it's always hooven, and it always has horns. And everything else is kind of up for grabs. And it's described as more of a horse-like thing. Sometimes it's more of a goat. Sometimes it has more feety hands and back hooves. It can be bipedal. It cannot be. Sometimes it flies all over the place, which explains why it vanishes so quickly. It can be just about anything. So it just has to have those main traits.
Yeah, and what I found particularly interesting about this story was it was either his mother or someone similar who had an exorcism placed around the house, to drive out demons, and the Jersey Devil was not seen for 100 years after that, until the mid-1800s, which I found kind of interesting, but also, okay, maybe not have 13 kids, that's also an option.
Okay, what else and also do in, the middle of nowhere have kids?
Middle of nowhere, New Jersey. Which makes it kind of worse.
I would like to emphasize that I am not the one ripping on New Jersey.
But one of the things that really stuck out to me for the sightings of the Jersey Devil, and what I also find compelling in cryptozoology in general, is when there are multiple people in the same area who have seen the same thing, at the same time, because it raises, if it's one person in the middle of the night, but if it's 10, and I'm just going to read this off from Wikipedia, because it's easier than me summarizing. In short, Among alleged encounters publicized that week, which was in 1909, were claims that a creature, quote-unquote, attacked a trolley cart in Haddon Heights in a social club in Camden. Police in Camden and Bristol, Pennsylvania, supposedly fired on the creature to no effect. That really sticks out to me, because if the authorities feel like they need to use lethal force, like, what did they see? It had to have been something, you know, probably perfectly rational explanation for it. Other reports initially...
Was this during the day?
Let's see. I don't think it says. This is also kind of neat. Also, again, from Wikipedia, other reports initially concerned unidentified footprints in the snow, but soon sightings of creatures resembling the Jersey Devil were being reported throughout South Jersey and as far away as Delaware and western Maryland. Let's see here.
Do you think it's just a bunch of, like, woods goats?
I would absolutely be okay with New Jersey just being taken over by fucking goats. Absolutely.
I really hate the state.
Goats are great. Black Phillip 2020. But this is also kind of interesting. During this period, it is rumored that the Philadelphia Zoo posted a $10,000 reward for the creature's dung. That is getting science involved.
What year is this?
1909.
How were they gonna check?
I have no idea. Let's assume for a second that the Jersey Devil exists, just for sake of argument. Assuming it has a mostly horse-like body, you assume it's an herbivore. How in the world would you tell it was any different from livestock, like somebody may have had wandering around?
Yeah, but it's not gonna fly if it's a horse.
Well, I'm saying that, like, the body, the body itself is of a horse. So I'm saying that, in theory, if it actually existed, it would probably be an herbivore. But there also has been a number of livestock killings attributed to the Jersey Devil as well. Mm-hmm. Which doesn't surprise me, because bipedal cryptid automatically equals livestock killings, and how many of those do you want to bet are basically due to farmer negligence, as much as they want to say. Yep.
Stray dogs.
Oh, and what was that game you said you loved playing?
There's so many.
Is it a cryptid or a coyote with mange?
Oh yeah, that is the game I usually play. So Chupacabra, which is the big one that people tend to think about, I think, when they think of cryptids.
Right.
The big things that tend to come up is it's coyotes with mange, which look very strange. Animals without hair, especially if they're bloated and they've been drowned or washed up on shore,
right,
are terrifying. If their little faces have rotted off, all you see is like a beak-like skull poking out. But you can easily tell by the dentition what it actually is. The Montauk Monster. So it was an animal carcass. It washed up. People took pictures of it. It's a raccoon. Raccoons are fat and weird, and when they don't have hair, they look even weirder. And this one didn't have much of a face either. So when you have something in some stage of decomposition, it definitely changes the body. Do you want to see it again?
Well, no. Now that you actually make those points, and then I'm looking at this image that you have up, that older print of the Jersey Devil, if you look at the lower half of the body, what I would absolutely love to see is take pictures of a horse in decomposition, lower half, how much you want to bet it's going to look a little bit like that, at least.
There's also the possibility that it's a gaff that somebody built, so that would be a fake taxidermy piece.
I'm totally all for that. 1,000%.
I mean, there's...
Bad taxidermy 2020.
Oh, God, yes. But that kind of brings us back around to jackalopes.
Jackalopes are great.
Jackalopes are great. That's what kind of got me into cryptozoology.
Right.
The real jackalope actually is hares and rabbits can develop this wart-like infection, and it looks like horns.
See, that, I would totally understand people think like jackalope as a natural extension of that. Like, I would absolutely...
There's a lot of old prints with them, and when you have people who are making drawings before photography is a thing, a lot of the images are from description. So every description that you give an artist is going to be interpreted differently.
Right. Right.
And if they have no knowledge whatsoever, if you want a good laugh, look up what people in Europe thought lions and tigers looked like.
Those medieval illuminators. How many wings do bats have? 6.
Like the devil.
Yup, exactly.
Yeah.
So, no, that also throws in a whole other wrench to these cryptids that have been reported since 1500s, 1600s. It's time changes all stories, at least in this regard. And then you don't really have photography for a thing that is flying past you in the middle of the night.
But that also may explain why we have way fewer sightings. They seem to have kind of peaked in the 90s. And that's really before flip phones or anything where you've got a convenient means of bringing photography along with you. You might have a Polaroid camera or a disposable camera, but I don't even think digital cameras were really around yet, were they?
Not on a large scale at the very least.
I think there might have still been trail cams. That's as close as we can get.
What I would absolutely love to see is take maybe square mile of the Pine Barrens and set up like 50 trail cams. See what comes back. Because you never know what's out there, and I think that would be a kind of interesting way to compare notes. And,
I think people would be absolutely terrified to know how many coyotes and feral dogs are within walking distance of them.
But yeah, I absolutely love some of the pictures that I've seen that come back from trail cams. Like, there have just been huge clusters of deer. I mean, like, yeah, herds, but it especially at night, it looks eerie, and I think that stuff is great.
Oh yeah, nothing is more terrifying than shining a light out into the woods and getting eye shine back and wondering what kind of critter it is.
Yep, and
especially there's some you're like, all right, I know that's a deer. Don't know what that one is though. I'm gonna go inside.
Yep, I think people having that very natural fear of there's something else out there. I don't want anything to do with this. is a very normal and healthy
primal
thing.
Instinct, because as much as we've done quite well taking over the planet as the apex predator, there are things that'll happily eat us.
I mean, given that you have the cabin in the middle of sort of nowhere, have you ever seen anything?
I just assume it's meth heads.
I mean, have you ever actually seen anything that it's like hard to explain?
No, I'm sorry. Like, that's the thing. I am a person who requires hard proof.
You had to go out after dark, just take care of something outside. Like, was there anything you ever saw that you were uncertain of what you saw? Is what I'm saying.
Like, that's the thing too. Is like, I always assume it's just an animal. So like, that's kind of where I go with it. Like, I get pretty ballsy when I'm out in the woods for a while. Like, honestly,
I'm
my grandfather's service revolver and an axe, and a 140-pound mastiff. I'm pretty fearless when I'm out there.
Yeah,
and the longer I'm out there, my social skills begin to decline. I name all the birds.
Well, I mean, I'm sure the birds are better company than half the bipeds around here.
And Roger are doing quite well, thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, the cottage up in Canada, I'd absolutely love to say, I saw this one thing one time, but the most lethal thing up there are bears that think your garbage smells really good. And I can't even lay claim to that because there's a landfill that's 2 miles down the road, not close to anybody, so the bears are going to be around there.
But, I'm a woods yeller. Like, when I'm out there for a while, and if I do hear something, I'm like, it's probably not a deer, I will just, yell out into the woods. Like, I have a dog, I have a gun, you need to not be on my property, and then I'll just go back in the cabin.
Well, now I know who to pair up with should everything go to hell in a handbasket.
Well, no, I mean, my neighbor across the way, I'm just going to call her Dee because I don't know if she actually wants her name on here. Dee has assassinated many a snake out there too, and so sometimes we're just crazy together because our cabins are across from one another, so we sort of look out for each other when we're out there. I pity anybody who comes up to our cabins and tries to break in while we're there. She has 2 dogs, I have a big dog, we're both armed to the teeth.
That is pretty great. I remember as a kid waking up to the sound of gunshots first thing in the morning because my grandfather, my mother's father, he would be going around and killing porcupines because they were chewing on the wood of the cottage.
Oh yeah, they'll do that.
So that was certainly interesting, kind of a violent way to wake up.
Yeah.
Do you think there is any possible validity to cryptid stories? And I'm not saying the type of stories, we had a couple of beers and we were out in the boat and then somehow didn't drown. Anyway, say maybe genetic mutation, for example.
Oh, certainly. Nature is full of infinite possibilities, and there are definitely mutations or deformations of creatures that could appear to be absolutely terrifying. Especially, you don't even have to be drunk, you just have to be alone in the woods or close to alone in the woods, and your mind will start making things up.
Yep, absolutely. I think, honestly, yes, there are pranksters and people who pull hoaxes, absolutely, but I think if you experience something on your own, it doesn't even have to be anything supernatural necessarily, and there's no one else there to validate the experience saying, hey, I saw that too. That may inherently make people less likely to speak up, because
but now you have no excuse. People can't be away from their phones. They are fused to them.
Yeah.
Even when I don't have reception on my phone, it's in my pocket because I want to take pictures of everything. I have 5 million pictures of my dog in the woods.
That is
If there was a Sasquatch next to him, I'm going to take a picture of it. There's no excuse anymore.
That's
and that's why I think we haven't really heard as much about them, because we do have these amazing cameras. My iPhone takes better pictures than the professional camera I used to use when I worked for a photographer.
That's insane.
So if these things are out there and people are seeing them at the rate that they're saying, they probably take a picture of it. The thing is, though, now when they sober up, they can look at their phone. Oh yeah, it's just my neighbor. He won a couple beers.
Previous point you made saying that these cryptid sightings seem to have kind of peaked during the 90s. And I know we're not covering the satanic panic because it's done 1,000,001 times, but that timeline kind of overlaps because the satanic panic starts to die out around at the end of the 90s. And any descriptions that you hear of these, especially bipedal cryptids, it's positively satanic. I'm wondering if there's any tie-in with the end of the satanic panic and the upswing of the weird cryptid renaissance that was the 90s. And also mid-1900s, too.
That. Yeah, like in the 90s, I mean, maybe it's something that tends to happen like every 40 years or something. And now we've got the internet, which may also just be a big distraction. People are not wandering around in the woods as much.
And also, I want to live during a cryptid renaissance. God, yeah, I'm going to somehow make that a thing.
Well, then you need to get to documenting, because I think that's what killed it. I really do. Yeah. Because now you have to put your money where your mouth is. There's no excuse to no longer have documentation. In the 90s, I mean, think of the X-Files. It is almost painful to watch the old X-Files.
Yes,
when, Scully gets a call from Mulder at a restaurant and they have to take her to the landline to respond. When they have no pictures of anything, because why would they?
Yep.
Like, the best they can hope for is a little camera that goes to fast forward to the next picture. And so it works in that context. And so that might also be part of it, is you did have the X-Files in the 90s, which played pretty heavily into our love of cryptids and explored a lot of that. And that general attitude, chicken or egg, who knows which came first, if it was sort of a renaissance that was inspired by the TV of the time, or if the TV of the time was playing off of the strangeness that we were all very fascinated with. That's also a very valid point. I think all those things absolutely tie together, and we would not have the blessing that is the X-Files without Twin Peaks. Absolutely not. Anyway, much of an aside as that is, I will always, always, always have a soft spot for the Mothman. Did you have a time when you were younger that inspired an interest in cryptozoology? It was jackalopes. Like, they were always, I thought they were so cool. Okay. We talked about jackalopes a little bit, but yeah, I liked jackalopes. And when I found out that it was just as a taxidermist ploy to make money, but it was also based off of that legend that was like the warty rabbits. So you had all these diagrams and drawings of rabbits with what looked like horns. Then you get a taxidermist who slaps some pronghorn horns on a bunny and starts selling them. It's a jackalope. I'm all for that. Taxidermy is God's gift to humankind. We're going to have to do an entire episode on just cryptozoological taxidermy, because that's a thing. Yes. You have the Fiji mermaid, for example, which is just a monkey slapped on a fish and sold to tourists. It's pretty big in the age of Cabinet of Curiosities, but continued on because it's a good way to make money. You'd see them in, like, Ripley's Believe It or Not, and P.T. Barnum, I believe, had quite a few. Yep, been to a Ripley's Believe It or Not museums, if you can call it that, and that very much fits the bill for what I found there. I don't know about you, but personally, if that kind of thing was sold to me, I'd be like, I am being had, and this is great, and I will absolutely spend, like, $150 on this. I don't care. I don't know, like, how much people bought into it or how much they were buying into the experience, which I think is a big appeal of the cryptids. Yeah. You're not necessarily buying into these things exist. You're buying into this idea that there's still mysteries out there. Yep. And that you want to explore them. And some people have been studying these things for years. They've made it their life's work to try and track down these creatures that we have very little documentation of. And I can't help but wonder if they actually caught one, if they'd be thrilled or disappointed. That reminds me of the one cryptid hunting society that I found that I shall not name, just to not shame anybody, where their evidence page, which I was all gung-ho to read, was completely blank. I can send you the link to it if you want. The Sasquatches took it. They just are very camera shy. And I'm like, God. They sent a cease and desist, and they had the photos removed. Even just a basic write-up saying, as of right now, we have found nothing conclusive. It's a volunteer effort. You have full-time jobs. I get it. But put something up there, for the love of God. Yeah. I think what immediately grabbed my attention and drew me naturally toward the cryptids was seeing that very lackluster film, The Mothman Prophecies, with Richard Gere when I was a kid. Boy, that's like a flat C all the way across,
isn't it? I know, right?
You're like, they're trying so hard. Great production values, but it's a very big movie where nothing happens.
Yup, vaguely threatening voice, kind of spooky. It was that type of thing that always creeped me out the most as a kid.
When people come from different places, I guess the question is, do they bring their local legends with them? And you have some that are pretty much ubiquitous, like everybody has some kind of shapeshifter.
Yep.
And there's a lot of ape men, like you have yetis and things like that from overseas, and they tie in pretty closely with what we have as a Sasquatch, or skunk ape, or one of the many other names for it. Which, I mean, it comes down to the thought that there is a bipedal primate of some kind that is large, hairy, largely harmless, and is very bad at getting its picture taken.
Okay, so I'm assuming we've both read a fair amount of background cryptid stories, right?
Yes.
Obviously, there's some interconnecting themes. Do you have a specific favorite interconnecting idea? You know, like for me, it's livestock slaughtering, when it's like, guys, there's probably a plague that knocked out most of your sheep. You know, like, do you have any favorites?
Did you get drunk and let them out?
I mean, hey, you know, if the shoe fits.
Well, the ones that scare me the most are things under the water. Just because, like, the idea of being on a ship at night and having something big enough to rock the boat, or just taking a lantern out over the water and seeing all the waves reflected and seeing the head of something pop up from under the water is terrifying.
Absolutely. And I think also it's super important when people discuss cryptozoology and cryptids and basically the spoopy unknown that is undefined, because it most likely does not exist. Yeah, it probably doesn't exist, but when people get smug about it, like I would have been afraid to be like, excuse you, yes, you absolutely would have, because if that thing can eat me, I am going back to bed, please and thank you.
Yeah. If you aren't afraid of it, by all means, go back out there by yourself at night and see how you feel.
Yeah.
It's okay to be afraid of bears and meth heads. That's fine.
And also,
you're not less of a man because you don't want to get shanked or eaten.
And also, in terms of survivability, out in the woods by yourself, say you get lost, there are things out there that have night vision.
You're not one of them.
Yeah.
No.
For me personally, in this age of, as you said, everybody has a phone with them all the time, even if you don't have signal, you're out there taking pictures, that there is still room for that spirit in this current age. I think for me, that's the biggest appeal about cryptids, because there are people still out there asking, you know, like, what if? I don't necessarily like all the conclusions, like, the Jersey Devil is real. No, it's not that. It's just that spirit of exploration is still very much alive, and it's spooky exploration, and I can absolutely appreciate that. Reminds me of an earlier point that I wanted to make. I remember the screenshot I saw, somebody had found something that it looked like it was cresting the surface of the ocean, and it was on Google Earth. And it looks like this massive, gargantuan, the size and scale of it, it was probably a whale cresting. But if memory serves, the image itself, it looks more like a giant sea noodle, you know, like a giant sea monster. And the picture at the time it was taken, it looks like this thing is in motion. So you're not, of course, as always, you're not getting a clear, full picture. But this particular image is in the middle of the ocean. It's not near anything. So to me, there's something rather adorable and charming about the fact that someone sat there for probably hours scouring Google Earth for interesting stuff, and they found that, and they're like, oh my god, what am I looking at? And of course the people on Facebook were like, this is proof of blah blah blah. I'm like, it's proof that something happened, that something crested, and it was probably a whale. And you know what? The fact that Google Earth caught that image at the moment it did, that's pretty cool by itself. You don't necessarily need to be like, it's, you know, this giant spooky thing.
But I like the idea of like, ooh, what's that?
Yeah,
I like
exactly.
that
spirit of exploration is still very much alive.
But it's also safe exploration, because very rarely are these things right outside your home. Like, most people don't live out in the woods anymore. Most people aren't on cargo ships all the time. So when you're exploring these cryptids, you get to go back to your nice, warm, safe house, and you're not going to wake up with a chupacabra in your living room.
Again, that spirit of exploration, I think that's my favorite thing. Yes, and also, I gotta admit, I love the X-Files, and the reboot very much warmed my frozen wasteland of heart. I think there's also still a lot of stuff out there that we haven't seen, that we do not have documentation of yet, but we will sooner or later. A 99.999% chance that it is a thing that falls neatly and rather beautifully within what we know of science and nature as it is right now. And you know what? That's totally fine. That's totally great. But it's that, again, that spirit of exploration that keeps us discovering new things. And I think that's super important. I think also with this exploration and wanting to find out what's out there is really great, but you need to be highly attentive to detail, and you need to be super critical. And as you mentioned earlier, and it kind of made me realize this, anecdotal evidence isn't good enough anymore. No. It never has been, really. But, you know, in the early 1900s, people didn't have amazing cameras in their pockets. So for them to recount that stuff, and, you know, that's one thing, but it's basically, not to sound like a broken record, but Pics didn't happen.
Yeah.
This is the only age in the history of humankind where we can actually say that with some sincerity.
Yes, and I think it applies to this far more than it applies to many other things.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see, though, as time goes on, what other discoveries of species that we, especially in the deeps of the ocean, because I feel like, anyway, if memory serves, we only have a very infinitesimally small percent of the ocean floor mapped.
Oh yeah.
And that's the floor, like, what is swimming out there and all that stuff. This moment of there are still things out there. I get really, really excited about, like, spooky discovery. That's just what I'm calling it, where it's just an unknown. What if it's a new whale cry? That's super cool. Like, to me, that's equally cool. Better than any fucking cryptids or anything like that. Because it's a new unknown behavior. Like, it was only more recently that we discovered that giraffes vocalize. They do. It's beneath human hearing.
Oh.
And someone recorded it, and it sounds like grunting, but
you know that rats giggle? Yeah, it's very cute.
I just like all these things. Rats, super common household thing.
Well,
I mean, ideally not household.
I was gonna say not if you're
ideally,
well.
But, like, you know, everybody knows what they are to some degree, has firsthand experience. Hopefully not a lot, but all these things that we don't know, and it's this very common thing.
But it comes back to technology. We didn't know these things because we didn't have the technology. So back to actually cryptids. The burden of proof, I believe, needs to keep pace with technology.
That's a very good way of putting it.
Anecdotal evidence was acceptable when that was all we had, and that was the best you could do. But now that we have cameras that can photograph things so sharp that people are probably not happy about it when they have to record themselves for YouTube, there's no reason I should not get a Sasquatch in HD.
That is very true. And I will say that one film that supposedly, from the 70s, I think, that supposedly shows a Sasquatch, the level of, if that's a hoax, which I personally think it is, the level of attention to detail that went into that's almost commendable.
The one where it's walking and it looks back over its shoulder? Yeah, that's one to look into. Like, apparently the people who filmed it, there were, like, dogs around, the dogs were like, eh. So that, to me, proves that it's a dude in a suit. That the dogs knew.
Exactly.
My dog, and many other dogs, will lose their shit if there's a deer in the backyard. Can you imagine how nuts they'd go if a bear monkey was running around outside?
Yep, that totally makes sense. Also, all I want to say is your spoopy boof is a cryptid.
My massive beast. Anyway, I think that about wraps it up for our cryptid discussion. You can find us on Podbean and Facebook under It Began in the Basement, and we can't wait to talk to you next week. Have a good night, everyone!